Once around the park, James, and don't spare the horses.
It's showtime.
It is showtime. Welcome in. It's On the Ledger Ontario Politics Podcast. I'm Dave Trafford. We're back in the chair, around the table, ready to go. And this would be the show that, we kick things off the week before they get back into the legislature. It's been a long time off, so there's lots to talk about. So we've got around the table. John Wright is here, our veteran pollster and co-founder of the podcast in 2018. Kathleen Wynne is here, former Premier of Ontario. Keith Leslie is seeing here. I'm on CHTV, and he was an early joiner back in the summer of 2018. And Tim Hudak joining us here as well, a former leader of the PC party. So want to get to a couple of things, but of course, all the conversation right now is all about Stellantis. The conversation that's going to be had later today as we record this between the Prime Minister and Premier Ford. They will be talking clearly about what's next vis-a-vis trade. So just to put some context and wrap this up a little bit, I just want to refer to what I thought was just a great report by Siobhan Morris last night on CTV. And she rings all the bells, and then we can go around the table and kind of hit on what is going to happen and what is expected to happen.
The anger over Stellantis' plan to move production of the Jeep Compass to Illinois could mean a trip to court.
Not only am I disappointed, it's completely unacceptable. So we will fight for these jobs.
CTV News has obtained a letter by Jolie to the president of Stellantis today, stressing Stellantis agreed with the governments of Canada and Ontario to maintain its full Canadian footprint, including Brampton, in exchange for substantial financial support. Anything short of that commitment will be considered a default under our agreement.
We will make sure that we push the company and we hold them to account.
Ontario's promised more than $500 million to help Stellantis modernize its plants in Brampton and in Windsor.
I'm not going to give them a penny because it was tied in to making sure Windsor and keep Brampton going.
There are billions more on the table between Ottawa and Queen's Park to fund an EV battery plant in Windsor. The Premier's office considers that a separate question.
I think they need to use that leverage and say, hey, what kind of commitments do we have? And how do we make sure, again, what else could we be doing?
Doug Ford's conversations with the company offer no immediate hope for Stellantis workers in Brampton, who've been laid off for retooling for nearly 2 years.
He said, well, we're going to postpone it for a year. We're going to find a new model. And they're going to try to transfer 1,500 people from Brampton down to Windsor,
where a third shift is being added early in the new year. The opposition pushing the Premier for a more aggressive posture.
We need a sector-specific strategy. His wait-and-see approach just doesn't seem to be working.
For his part, Ford appears frustrated dealing with a president he calls a tyrant, a piece of work.
I am sick and tired of sitting and rolling over.
Premier Ford is scheduled to meet with Prime Minister Mark Carney on Thursday. Ford gave us a preview of the message he intends to share about what he believes needs to happen next.
If you can't get a deal, let's start hitting him back. Let's start hitting the U.S. back hard.
It's not clear if Carney is prepared to put counter tariffs back on the table. Siobhan Morris, CTV News.
Okay, so a lot of worms in that can, Tim Hudak, and the first of all, just the idea that this seemed to come out of the blue for so many people that Stellantis was going to pull out of Brampton and head south to the U.S. Headline in the Globe and Mail said Canadian leaders are naive to be shocked about the Stellantis move, particularly a week after we heard Lutnick talking about, well, it's a number one priority for the Americans to be number one in the automotive industry. What say you?
It is surprising that people were surprised, quite frankly, because certainly, talking to folks in the auto sector, this was not surprising for two main reasons, Dave. And then I'll give a comparison here, I think, between Diageo and Stellantis. Number one, right now, all the major auto manufacturers are bleeding cash because they've been impacted by the tariffs. They don't want to increase prices, largely because no big auto dealer manufacturer wants to get the ire of President Trump for raising prices and blaming tariffs. As soon as one breaks, the others will. But they're bleeding cash right now to suck up the tariff impact. And Stellantis is in the most vulnerable position of all of the automakers. while Jeep and the Ram truck are doing well, the rest of their brands are not. And then secondly, the Brampton plant was being retooled. It had been idled for some time. I think that announcement was made back in 23, effective beginning of this year. Their goal there, Dave, was to produce the EV-powered vehicles. And when we've seen the change in the EV mandate in the States and now in Canada, and then secondly, a decline in sales of EVs, Stellantis was looking probably at operating a half-capacity plant at best, and made the decision. Those are the underlying factors. It's not so much the tariffs directly, it's the weakened position and the shift away from the EV. What's a bit different here in terms of Premier Ford's reaction compared to Diageo, I think was part of the art of government relations. So Diageo did not give the province a heads up. They're closing the bottling plant down in Windsor. When the Premier tried to call in, he got some sort of second tier person and really inflamed the issue, causing the reaction. Here, Stellantis did call in the Premier, the Economic Development Minister, same at the federal level, and gave them a heads up and a promise that there would be jobs coming to that plant. So for the time being, I guess they're trusting, waiting, and seeing. But that's why the response of Ontario has been different than you saw with Diageo. And, finally, here on this topic, I think the federal government, played the right card in terms of tapping into the anger and frustration that Canadians are feeling. You got to be seen to be fighting for those jobs. I guess it's their version of the Diageo Crown Royal stunt. But I have to think that, when I've been part of these contracts in government, or now as a consultant working with federal provincial governments for, keeping jobs here, attracting new ones, they're pretty iron tight in terms of making sure money doesn't flow unless qualifications are met, money back if you actually don't carry through. So, hopefully a lawsuit isn't necessary. I can't imagine they'd sign away the money and flow it unless those jobs are actually underway.
Kathleen Wynne, the whole idea, the Diageo scenario is, again, I understand what Tim's saying in terms of the heads up and the notice and everything else that went with it. But if you get right down to it, for both of these companies, they're just trying to stay in business, keep doing business. And this is an economic decision that they're making, period. That's why they're moving and they're making these moves. It's got nothing to do with them not liking us here in Canada or the workers in Brampton or elsewhere. So on the surface, if the thing was flipped, we'd understand why an American company might move to Canada if it was strictly economics.
Yeah, I mean, I think from my reading of it, that's more the case in the Diageo situation, where it was a business decision. I mean, yes, the Stellantis decision is obviously a business decision, but I think we have to put the Stellantis decision in a broader context of the auto sector, and that's what I'm most concerned about. Lutnick's comments about America being first and we should be happy to be second. That's not how the auto sector has worked for decades in North America, in the Great Lakes region. It's been a North American auto industry, and so that's what's on the table now. So I think that the federal government, to Tim's point, they're talking about this lawsuit, but the penalties must be built into that arrangement with Stellantis. So I suspect that there are major penalties that they will face, financial penalties, but that's not going to change their decision. And so I think that what we really have to be hoping is being thought about in the federal and the provincial government is, okay, well, what if this just continues to happen? And the big threat to the auto sector is actually not the Americans, it's actually the Chinese. If you listen to the conversation about what the Chinese can do in terms of producing autos and where they're going, that's where the bulk of the threat actually is coming from. Trump can try to disentangle the North American auto industry, but that's not going to help the American auto industry either. So this is a short-term play I think for Stellantis and actually for the American auto industry. They would be much better to continue to strengthen the integrated auto sector that we have in North America. But that's not what Trump's going to do. He's not doing this based on evidence or based on any long-term plan. So I think we have to be very worried that we continue to bleed jobs in the auto sector, and we need to have a plan. I mean, I think Marit Stiles is right. There needs to be a plan for how we are going to either retool those factories, retrain those workers, or figure out what the transition is to a stronger auto industry. I don't know what that looks like. Having sat in that chair as the Premier when Trump was first in office, and trying to work with that unpredictability, I'm not sure what that looks like. So they better have contingency plans, because this is not just a one-off in the auto sector, I'm afraid.
John, though, the issue here is that we keep talking about it as if there's going to be a deal that everybody's going to be pleased with. Trump has made it entirely clear that this is zero sum. It doesn't matter. I mean, and he expects to win and take all. So, that whatever plan we've got to get into our heads, don't we?
Well, I think listening to Premier Wynne talk about this, and Tim, I should be more optimistic this morning given how the Jays are doing. But I'm actually, I think, after having read a lot this week about where the Canadian economy is headed, and also reflecting upon what Howard Lutnick said at that Eurasia BMO insiders discussion, I'm of the view right now that this is an existential threat, that it's far greater than what we're dealing with in terms of the auto industry. I mean, the auto industry is under threat in the United States, where you can just have all the leaders, flown into the White House Oval Office and basically told bluntly, you're going to do this or there will be retaliations, and you can bring your plants home and get tax-free status, but this is what we're going to do. And so they're under great pressure to accede to the president's wishes, and we're seeing that. I mean, Howard Lutnick basically says, you know what? You've had a great ride for these last many years, Canada, on the auto trade pact, and you're going to have to find something else to do. You take a look at the GDP in this country, we're slipping into a recession. I mean, there's no question that we're headed in that direction. Tim would know that house sales are dropping again after some kind of spurt. People are becoming very, very nervous about this. And it's not just the individual companies that are affected, but it's the supply chain and everything else that goes with it. I don't know what the answer is, and I don't think any politician knows what the answer is. Whether it's retail politics and let's hit them back and let's do this and do that. I mean, that doesn't seem to be the tone of the day, because you can try and hit back, but they'll just dismiss you, or they'll hit back as well. This requires a much greater strategy and a lot more minds around the table than simply coming out and saying, we got to do this, we got to sue. I mean, the reality also is that you can't have governments just bailing everybody out and backing everybody in terms of wages over the next 3 to 4 years while this president does what he's going to do, because it'll just bankrupt us. So I come to the table, as I said this morning, a lot more pessimistic in terms of what we can do. And I think, again, with the EV market down the way it is because the mandates aren't there, because of all, the auto sector is not only in peril, but all the supply chain and also our entire economy, because the United States is just picking things off. So again, I don't know what the answer is to this, but what I do know is that if it's simply retail politics and not some kind of other group that's bringing to bear some real strategy and real plan for some kind of transition, which may take a couple of years or more, I don't know where we're going to end up on this file, because the economy itself is now very sluggish. Unemployment is rising. And I think fear is going to start to move into the Canadian public far more than it has before, because they're now going to have tangible evidence that this is the way things are going to be over the next period of time.
Okay, I'm going to hang crepe while we hear from Keith on this. Just Keith, Leslie, this sounds more like the cartoon where, the bully has just put his hand on the little guy's head, and the little guy's just swinging away in the air, and not really making any impact on the bully. I mean, I understand the elbows up from Premier Ford. I understand Jolie having her say about, we're going to go to court, take them to court. But to John's point, there really isn't a ton that we can do effectively in the short term, other than kind of wait this out to see how it happens. The plan might be just to hold your breath and hope for the best.
Can we afford to wait it out? Can we subsidize our auto industry to the point where, Trump has gone from office? I'm not so sure we can. I mean, I'm very pessimistic about this. It obviously was an economic decision by Stellantis. And they're not concerned about the fact that they sell 1.6 million vehicles back into Canada each year. That's not a concern for them because the economics of it all, they need to move to the United States. Premier Wynne said it, and this is the big concern. Stellantis is not a one-off. And we start seeing others, when we start seeing the big players like this packing up shop or reneging on their commitments to us, commitments to Canada and to Ontario, that's some scary, scary stuff. And they're doing, again, basically just on economics. We know that, President Trump has said it very clearly. He wants certain things in Canada, including not just the 51st state stuff. He wants our critical minerals. He wants Alberta's oil. He wants us to basically become an economic, just to cripple our economy. He's heading to do it. And one key way to do it is, as Lutnick said, your auto industry, you've had a good run, but it's over. We're going to take over the complete thing. So I don't know. I mean, we've already got some prairie premiers talking about removing the 100% tariffs on Chinese EVs and letting them come in. Well, that would, put the final coffin into the nails of the Canadian auto industry, I think. But can our economy withstand that kind of thing? Can we afford to subsidize it to that point for that many years? I don't think so. This is a real serious threat. And I don't know what the strategy is from the government. I don't know what the solutions could be other than, as Dave, you point to, it's a bully. And he's already made it clear. He wants to cripple our economy. This is an economic warfare. And going after the auto industry is it's almost low-hanging fruit for Trump and his acolytes to do this, to do as much damage as they can to Canada. It's scary, but I really do fear for the future of not just the auto industry, but the spin off the whole economy. It would be so crippling so fast to the Ontario economy, the engine of Canada, the economic engine of Canada, if this escalates and we see 2 or 3 more companies pulling the same, we're just pulling stakes and going to the United States. And as for the commitments to the EV battery plants going forward, boy, I think we got to be pretty skeptical and maybe rewrite those contracts to make sure that not a dollar flows until those factories are up and running.
Well, I think that was implied in most cases, and certainly Doug Ford was making that noise. We're not going to give them any more cash until they've delivered on what they have to say. Any other week without this story, the health minister, Sylvia Jones, would have had unusually good media coverage because she came out and said that, they're really making some progress in terms of getting primary health care delivered to Ontarians, Tim. The numbers were huge and they were unacceptable in terms of folks who didn't have family doctors or GPs, but they've come out and said they've pretty much cut that in half already based on numbers from last January.
That's a great point. And that's one of those things that you would, keep a progress report as you match up more people with a family doctor. I should say off the top, Dave, Intermedical Association is one of my clients in the consulting world. So I'll let folks know that. One thing I've always believed in, when I was PC leader was, when you take a team-based approach, right? When you can have doctors working with nurse practitioners, working with chiropractors, working with nutritionists, it's much better comprehensive care. And if you can free up the doc, then from the paperwork, I think physician-led, right? Then you can actually spend more time with patients and then get more patients matched with doctors. So good for Minister Jones. I know something she's always cared deeply about when we were in opposition together. I would just keep pounding away that good news and look for more ways of this team-based approach, relieve the paper burden on our healthcare professionals, and keep fighting for progress.
Same story, though, John, is that the province has stepped in and said, those who graduate from Ontario medical schools will get priority in terms of, residents, jobs in the province. I can see both sides of that. I understand the benefit of having a young medical student who grew up and went to high school in Ontario, going to university in Ontario and getting a job in Ontario is more likely to stay in Ontario.
Well, if I understand the policy correctly, it's also to liberate those who have gone outside of the country because they can't get residency here, or they want to fast track it to become medical doctors and they've gone to other countries. I mean, Ireland, I think, is producing more Ontario ex high school kids as doctors than any other place that I know of. I'd answer it a couple of ways. Number one, again, I talk about retail politics from this government because that seems to be how it's dealt with, and so this plays to that notion. I mean, every poll that you would have on this would say that Ontarians and Canadians in general would say, look, if a kid's from a province, and they graduate near the top of their class, they shouldn't be forced to go elsewhere and get a medical degree and then come back to Canada and hope that they get in. This encapsulates the, made in Canada, let's keep our own here, and to, reject always bringing in foreign students or those who have come from other countries to do that. I'm not exactly sure how that's going to affect the medical profession, but in this neighborhood alone where I live, there's at least 3 young people that I can count who have gone to other countries, 1 to England and 2 to Ireland, 1 to London and 2 to Ireland, who couldn't get in here and who are fast-tracked to become doctors and are coming back. So, I mean, that's kind of one part of this. I wonder where Jane Philpott is in all of this. I mean, it's one thing to have the minister who's talking about this and getting credit perhaps for it. And she tends to be, on point and does the press conferences, but we know that she doesn't say very much very often. But we also have somebody who's in charge of this file, from trying to link up people. And I wonder whether or not it's time that we get another voice on this, a former physician, or I guess you never become not a physician in a sense, but somebody who's leading this and maybe part of that discussion. I think it's going to play okay. I hope that, with the Canadian Medical Association, the OMA saying that it could disrupt where we are and all of this, that it's not going to be the case. But I think I'm interested to see where Jane Philpott is in any file on this, because I haven't heard from her since her appointment. So it would be interesting to get a perspective from that.
Yeah, Kathleen Wynne, the Philpott, ingredient in all of this is really interesting, because it wasn't until she was appointed to this job that we saw these numbers increase. So you got to think that there is some link, there is some cause and effect there. But does this surprise you that they're able to come out 9 months after saying we had 235,000 Ontarians don't have a physician? All of a sudden we've cut that number in half. Does that sound reasonable to you?
So I think it's more like 2 million Canadian Ontarians who didn't have so they have cut a particular list in half. So it's good news. Look, this is good news. And it may be a family doc, it may be a nurse practitioner, but it's a primary caregiver, and that's great. I heard Jane Philpott shortly before she was appointed to her role speak at a Liberal convention, and she basically laid out the team approach that was in the blueprint that our government had laid out. And I am not in any way taking away from what Sylvia Jones has done, what this government has done. But what I'm saying is that for a number of years, probably going back into the Harris years, there has been an understanding that the interdisciplinary approach is what needs to happen. So am I surprised that they've been able to have this success by actually implementing that model? No, I'm not. I think it's a good thing, and I think it's what needed to happen. I have to say I'm a bit bemused by why they would undercut this announcement by stepping into this morass around, kids who have had 2 years of high school in Ontario, because they're obviously getting a lot of pushback in terms of, does that mean that we're not actually just going for the best? We're actually putting a qualifier on that. And, as an MPP, and Tim will have experienced that, I had lots of families coming in to me to say, my child has had to go, as John said, to Ireland or to Nevis, to, where there are medical schools that would take these kids, and then they couldn't get into the list for the residencies when they came back. So I understand politically why they have done this, but I'm very concerned that practitioners are saying this is not a good idea, and it smacks of a populist sort of response to a problem. I'm not sure it's the right response, but look, it is what it is. I think, the other thing that could have happened is the number of residency spots could have been expanded, and then part of that problem goes away, but that costs money. And there has been, there's been a reluctance, to be fair, on the part of this government to make the kinds of investments in healthcare or education that are actually needed. So I'm not surprised that they've been able to cut that list in half, but it's not the whole list. And as the reporting has said, there are the hard to serve areas that still are not are not necessarily moving ahead as quickly as other areas, and that's the north and remote areas. And so we'll see how they do on those, because those are more expensive. They require more attention than some of the more urban areas.
Yeah, that's the risk, right, Keith? I mean, as soon as you come out with an announcement like this and everybody's, oh, this is great, and we exhale and we're breathing now and we think that we're fixing a problem. And again, not to diminish, the success in this case, but, the same week we've got a Burlington family who's got a meeting with the health minister next week because the 16-year-old son died after a long wait in an ER. Now, we don't know the connection between the two and the specifics in terms of what was a cause and effect of that, but we've got bigger problems in the ERs and in the actual functioning of hospitals that go beyond just this part of the story.
Absolutely. And I think part of it, like all of it seems to be staffing, doctors, nurses, all the staff levels. And one thing we could look at here is residencies. I have a friend who just completed a residency as a young doctor. They're still doing this 24, 36-hour shift nonsense of residents. It's like, I don't know what they're learning from this, because they don't practice that once they get through that. It really is this grueling, almost military-like, boot camp that they put residents through. They could split those. They could have twice as many residents simply by cutting those 24 to 36-hour shifts that they put the residents through down to, half. They could double up that. That would, again, meant much more opportunity for people, whether they had to leave the country to get trained in medicine, come back here for residency or not. The rules, though, as Premier Wynne pointed out, this bringing in the high school criteria, that just seems bizarre, and it doesn't seem to, what anyone got in high school, how's it going to affect their marks as or their performance as a doctor that many years later? I just don't understand that. This situation, though, with the patient who died, waiting in the emergency room after so many hours. I mean, these kind of stories we're hearing all over the country. And they tend to be from smaller and rural hospitals that are not able to keep their emergency rooms open. But we know that even those that are keeping their emergency rooms open all the time, they're overcrowded, they're overwhelmed. And we see this from, whether it's small communities or bigger cities, the emergency departments are completely overwhelmed. And I think a lot of it, I know the government likes to look for private sector help to the problems it creates in healthcare. But I think a lot of this comes right down to underfunding. They're just not funding the healthcare system and the hospitals to the level that they need to be funded. And so we're seeing all these pressures all over the system to the point where we get these tragedies in an emergency room with someone not getting treated. It really does. I'm convinced it just comes down to underfunding. Now, the government will say, we've increased the funding, we put more into this, we've got special funds for that. But the bottom line is, with the population growth and inflation, they are underfunding what is actually needed in the healthcare system.
But you've said this before, Tim. I think you were referring to the healthcare system. It's like the broken down old car. And the more I talk to people about this, and my wife is a retired healthcare executive here in Toronto, and she will hear these stories and just point out, well, this system at this hospital is different than that system at that hospital down the street, and they're completely different than the one outside in the 905 region. So just the simple thing of sharing information about patients, as fundamental as we all think that should be, is broken. There is no connectivity there. I had a friend who suffered a stroke back in August, and when he went to the emergency room at a Toronto hospital, he waited 3 hours before he was seen by a doctor. So there are all kinds of worms in this can. I don't know where we go and how we sort through it, but the systemic issues around healthcare are what we have to deal with here.
Yeah, I'll go back to, I'm the long-term public healthcare system pessimist. It is great. We want to make sure that every Canadian has access to healthcare. But we remain, along with North Korea and maybe still Cuba, as one that is dominantly, almost exclusively in some areas, publicly health funded, and in too many areas operated. I don't think government is good at running things typically. I would have thought, I would have lost this bet. Some bets I might have got, some bets I would have lost. I would have lost this one. I would have thought back when I was first elected that by now, that the baby boomers and Current company accepted. For those on the panel, if you're in the boomer category, they all look like you're a bit younger than that.
Yeah.
I would have thought the boomers, a generation known for really, pressing their issues, making cultural changes, policy changes, would have by now said they are impatient with the broken healthcare system and demanded a parallel private system. That hasn't happened yet. We've seen more and more of the funds from the budget go into healthcare, but honest to God, I think it is a car that does run out of gas, needs repairs every 5 years, inject a whole bunch of money into it, but it breaks down again. I still think we'll get to that point, Dave, but I would have thought by 2025.
Well, okay. On behalf of the boomers, sit down. Just
The boomers believe in the publicly funded healthcare system. The boomers created I'm a boomer. I'm 72. My dad worked in the private healthcare system and then in the public. So he was a doc before we had Medicare and after we had Medicare. My grandfather was a doc. He used to get paid with baked goods because families couldn't afford to pay him. So, boomers understand, because we lived in both systems, understand why it's so important that we have a publicly funded healthcare system. So that's why boomers are not pushing for private healthcare.
I've seen plenty of boomers cross the Peace Bridge, head down to Florida, skip the line to get their services. I think you'll see more of that happening in Canada. And again, let's be clear. Wow. You maintain a public system, but I think there will still be push to bring in some more choice into the system and to have a system that doesn't treat every patient as a cost center, and therefore you treat fewer, but you'd actually want to treat patients, get them better and more preventative care. We're not doing that with the public system.
Oh, come on. Boomers see national health care as part of the Canadian identity. I'm sorry, Tim, but the Canadian identity is particularly strong right now, centered around public health care and public education.
Yeah, all right.
I don't see us heading that way. Well, the private sector is the way to go. Okay, if you want the private health care, as you say, cross the Peace Bridge, get your scan or your MRI, or go down to Florida and get your whatever you want to do. You've got that ability if you're wealthy enough to afford private health care, go buy it in the United States.
All right, we Gen Xers are going to take over at some point in time. You guys can rule the roost and jump down my throat. I will change my bet then if On the Ledge is still running, and hopefully we'll still be the #1 Ontario podcast. I'll go with 2032. Who's on for that bet?
Well, the only thing I would say, again, I don't want to be negative Nelly here today, but I made my first speech at the Empire Club back in 2012 about the growing and aging population. I said to my wife the other night, who I met actually at the Ontario Medical Association, I've worked with those groups and the Canadian Medical Association for years. And I said at the time, we have a date that if we wanted to write a book, it would just be titled 2035. 2035 is a watershed for this country. It's at the time when our population through immigration will be growing us 100%. We're more than 3/4 of a baby short in order to replace us. So we're going to depend on immigration, but it's also the time when the impact of that boomer group of us are going to be weighing heavily on the long-term and extended care needs of our society. It's going to take remarkable funding to even keep us alive as all of those CPP indexed pensions and a whole bunch of other things in our society come to bear. Again, I want to come back to this and say that there are fundamental strategies that are necessary for this country to move forward. In the province of Ontario, I've seen premiers now since I was a parliamentary intern back in 1980. Who have been very thoughtful about this, who have put forward plans, who have tried to strategically manage the healthcare system as opposed to, making a piece here and there. I don't hear a discussion about the issue I just raised. As I said, my first speech was in 2012. My second one was a reunion of that at the Empire Club on the Friday before we actually left for COVID and everything shut down. And so I don't know when you have this calculus where that burden is going to come into the system within a decade, where we can't kind of actually envelope all of this and figure out where we're going to have the funding and also the medical needs of our society met. Let's remember that Canada Health Act was to provide medically necessary things. And as a result of all kinds of other permutations in politics, it's expanded and expanded and expanded beyond that. So again, I don't want to be Mr. Negative this morning, but this is a much bigger issue than just kind of like, well, we've got some physicians that need to be added to the Ontario population to cut the need, and we have a bigger chore in front of us, and it's as predictable as stats can look at the demographics.
Just anecdotally, just to weigh in on the idea of the private sector's role in all of this. I'm the last guy in Ontario who had the red and white health card. Okay. I still had it. So I got the notice during COVID to say, you got to get rid of this thing because we're not going to treat you otherwise. So COVID hits and you can't do anything. So they gave me some grace time. Anyway, I finally got around to it a week or so ago, and I had to make an appointment with Service Ontario and got the appointment, went in. I swear to God, I walked in the door 5 minutes before my assigned appointment, walked up to the kiosk because it was an appointment only line. I gave her my appointment number. She said, go over there. They'll call you. I barely had my rear end planted in the chair. I got called to the counter. I was in and out in 10 minutes, in and out. And I said to the clerk, the woman who was serving me, said, I am just astonished that this is so incredibly efficient. And, for all of the work that we would think government would do. And this is government work not being done necessarily or delivered by the government. So the irony is, in all of this, you'll get your new health card in the mail. And of course, Canada Post was on.
Oh, no.
So anyway, we're all good.
But I'll just say one more thing on this. I'm sorry. But one of the things that we've tried to do, to John's point, to try to make some systemic change, and both our government and the current government have done this, is to try to have different delivery of public services. So, the public delivery or the private delivery of public service. So the lab system, for example, I go for blood tests on a regular basis. You go to Life Labs, you make an appointment, you go in, you get it done, you leave. So, there are certain aspects of the healthcare system that don't have to necessarily be delivered by a public institution, as long as they are covered by public funding. So I think there are some systemic things that we have tried to do, John, but the issue of what is the expectation of the healthcare system, you're right. We have never managed that as a country. We have no review mechanism that on a regular basis says, okay, what can we do? What can't we do? And I can tell you from knocking on doors all these years, people just expect the healthcare system to do everything. That's what the expectation is expanded to. And we have not dealt with that either at the federal level or the provincial level. We've never said, okay, what is the systematic way that we're going to determine what we do, what we don't do as a healthcare system? We just haven't done that.
That also applies to things like, disability benefits and everything else. You're more disabled in Ontario than you are in Alberta to get a benefit, or whatever the case may be. So yes, the expectations are, but again, I go back down to the idea that when we hear these good news stories, we want to exhale and think, oh, we're back on track. But there's so many issues and threads to pull here. That's the challenge. Premier Wynne, how often did you make a trip to Home Depot in your F-150 to pick up plants for the cottage? Without your detail, by the way.
Well, okay. So first part of this story, the magic sort of ability of Doug Ford to escape his detail. Nonsense. I used to go running in the morning on a weekend before my detail got there, and they were nowhere in sight. And one time I went running and I actually met them. They were on their way to my house and they were early, and I was out running. It's like, oops, I'm not supposed to be out here. So the fact is, the fact that he went to the store without his detail, not a big deal. Doesn't make him Wonder Man, Superman. But I really think that yes, there's a humorous side to this, but honestly, I think it's dangerous. I think that that kind of vigilante behavior. So he's a big white guy who happens to be the premier, and he takes on somebody in a parking lot. Like, is that really what we want modeled for kids? Is that really what, we think a premier should be doing? I think it's dangerous. And I think, either he was competing with John Burnside, because Burnside did the same thing in Toronto, but I don't think Burnside threatened to beat the guy across the parking lot, because that's the other aspect of this. The language that the premier used, I found really kind of shocking. And I understand that, and I heard people saying on the radio the next morning, well, this is why people love Doug. Well, okay, maybe, but that's not what leadership looks like. That's not part of his job as the premier. And I think it sets a really dangerous precedent and is a really unfortunate role model for everyone else.
For those of you who weren't in the room, the premier was sitting down with Ben Mulrooney at the Empire Club.
A couple months ago, I pull in, I escape from my detail at 8 o'clock in the morning before they come, and it ticks them off. So I hop in my pickup and I want to go to Home Depot. It was on a Saturday. And I pull up and I wanted to get some plants. Actually, it was the weekend before the Prime Minister came. I wanted to get plants for the cottage, so I loaded up. And I pulled up right by the nursery. I think majority have been to Home Depot, so I pull right up. I load up all the plants, and I'm ready to pull out. And here's this guy with a backpack and a bag. And he's walking out, and the store manager's yelling at him, come back, and the security guard's there. And I said, well, go get him. We aren't allowed to go get him. And so he went around the side of where all the plants and outside the parking lot. So I was in my car. I said, screw this. I'm going after this guy. So, and by this time, my heart's beating. I'm ticked off. So I go racing behind. No one can see. And I pull up behind him and jump into the car. I said, buddy, what's in your bag? Nothing's in my bag. I said, buddy, I'm going to kick your ass all over the parking lot. Show me what's in your bag. And I did. I couldn't help myself. And so I said, buddy, come over here. And nothing's in my bag. And so we start. Now, by this time, the store manager comes, and he's on fire. He's cursing and swearing. I guess I threw in a couple colorful language, too. And so he's emptying out his bag. And all of a sudden, so he's saying, nothing's here. I said, how about your other bag? It's because he dropped it and heard a cling. And so he went in there and he pulled out one of those saw blades that you open up. Yeah. And you use it as a saw blade. And the store manager said, that's what he stole. And then, we start saying da-da-da-da to the guy. And then I said, keep emptying out the bag. He pulls out some cutters, tin snips. And by this time, I'm in a pretty rage. I'm just in a full out rage on this guy. And I said, buddy, you stole those too? And he goes, I swear to God, I didn't steal them. He said, look at the rust on them. I looked at them, they were rusty. I said, okay, those are yours, but the rest? And then I went on to tell him if I ever see him in the parking lot, he's going to get a beating like he's never got before.
Tim?
Well, I will declare a conflict of interest on this because one of the things that you may or may not know about me, probably not, is that I love pro wrestling. I've been watching it since my dad took me to Buffalo Memorial Garden to see the Iron Sheik versus Jack Mulligan in a Texas death match in 1978. So I don't mind a little WWE getting kicked in every once in a while. Jesse the Body Ventura, I met with him when I was in government. That went on my wall. So I have a different view than the Premier on this. To be a bit more serious about it, well, number one, masterful storyteller. I was there, and there was this point where he turns just before the tape. He sort of looks at the audience, he looks back at the host, looks at the audience, and I shouldn't probably say this. And then he can feel it. And the Premier will appreciate this too. Like his staff are probably ready to run the scene saying, no, you're going to go off our message of getting the House back and, fighting back against tariffs. But number one, a masterful storyteller. So that cuts through. Secondly, this isn't about expecting, Premier Batman or Premier Ventura running around the province. This is really about tapping into the frustration that so many Ontarians feel with crime, whether it's stranger attacks, getting your car stolen, break and enter, stealing off the shelves. So I think a lot of people identified with this, not because they want the Premier to beat people up, but because they just feel so frustrated with rampant crime. So again, you know, it works for the Premier, and I had a personal appeal to it for many reasons. I was one of those laughing and clapping in the audience. You got me red-handed. Second point on this tactic will work until it doesn't, right? So there's always the risk of ad lib, whether it's the Crown Royal, which also hit this one, that eventually your message could come off as erratic, right? You plan out these messages day by day, months ahead of time to get around your central agenda and to characterize your opponents as being against those goals. So if there's a randomness, you risk that you don't get that message across over time. But for the time being, it's working for Premier Ford.
Yeah, Keith, there's a whole performative part of this, but I had the number of people who came out online almost immediately and said, just threatening bodily harm is a crime.
Yeah, well, you know, it's not the best behavior for an elected official, is it? I mean, let's just be honest. I mean, Premier Wynne is right. To Tim's point, a lot of people feel very frustrated when they see this kind of thing going on. I got to tell you, after listening to the Premier's full thing, I mean, and it did come across as humorous, especially to that particular crowd. But I thought, in listening to the details of the story, when he said, "Okay, empty your bag," when they found this little Sawzall type saw blade, he pulled out a pair of rusted tin snips. It tells me that this guy is probably a worker, a laborer who couldn't afford a new saw, and so he just stole it. I'm not saying that was right in any way, stretch, or form, but it's not like we've seen these videos of these guys going into the LCBO and just loading out, duffel bags full of booze and walking right out the door with, the security saying, "Please stop," but no one stops and they walk right out. That's not what this was. This seemed to be some poor guy who obviously stole something he shouldn't have done, but then he gets chased around the corner by the Premier, not a small man, who's in full rage, as he admits, and threatening to kick this guy's ass all over the parking lot. And the store manager is there as well. This guy's been captured. He's been caught with one item that he stole. I feel for this guy a little bit. I mean, I'm not being a bleeding heart about the whole thing. He committed a crime. It's the wrong thing to do. But the Premier should not have been out threatening this guy. And in a full rage, he admits he was in a full rage. This is the kind of thing that, slipping his security detail is one thing. But if you're going to slip your security detail, you shouldn't then go into a full rage state in public without someone around to stop you from behaving in a way you shouldn't.
Exactly.
Yeah, John, the idea of this is still under investigation by Home Depot because it apparently, as the Premier said, happened a couple of months ago or earlier in the summer. So the facts of the matter have not yet quite been confirmed. But it's interesting to see how the feedback from Home Depot is just now that somehow they didn't have an answer for this. If this had happened in your parking lot back in July, don't you think somebody would have made noise about the Premier just chased down a bandit? You're on mute, John.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Who knows? I don't know, but I want to go to what Tim has said because I think it's critical. The Premier's sitting at roughly 50% in the polls. I mean, it's not hurt him. You only need about 37 to 40% to get a massive majority government, and he's kind of floating on that edge. And he's actually been dug for the last many years doing and saying these sort of things. Maybe there's, some departure in the Premier's office that has let him a little longer off the leash for some of these things. But the reality is going to what Tim said, and that is, at the end of the day, you've got to have certain messages that are coming out of Queen's Park, and you're the chief spokesperson. And when you're dumping the Crown Royal, when you're talking about home invasion, when you're wrestling people in a parking lot, when you're trying to say, look, speed cameras are this and that, and we'll put speed bumps, way out in some place where you can't put speed bumps on them. When you're at the microphone saying we're going to hit back against Trump and we want all of these things done, and we're going to rip out these bike lanes and we're going to have a spa and all. I mean, there's a long list of things that maybe go to the frustrations of people in Ontario and may go to the aspirations of them, but there's no coherent kind of framework for what is the message? What is the most important thing to us right now? Is it this, or is it, the security of our economy or other things that are important? And I wonder whether or not this is accumulating in the absence of an opposition leader, because the NDP is not considered to be, heavyweight when it comes to this. And maybe that'll be the Liberals when they get their next leader in place. But I wonder whether or not, the cheese has slipped off the cracker a little bit, where we're missing out on the bigger picture when things are going to be very serious in this province. I mean, the economy is not tanking yet, but there's a really big slowdown. And on the horizon, you can see a collision coming between expectations and what people actually want done with government. And I would hope, somebody sits down and kind of goes, you know what, we've got 3 things that we need to keep saying in this province rather than these sort of things. And we need to be on message more skillfully. So, I think Tim's touched on it well, and that is, and I don't want to paraphrase it, Tim, but you run a risk. You run a risk until you've got an opposition leader, in fact, who is different and, in fact, goes to the seriousness of what we're dealing with as opposed to some of these retail political matters.
John,
okay.
Dave, can I just jump in two quick things? First of all, there is no doubt that the story that the Premier told taps into people's anxiety. I would suggest it actually compounds people's anxiety, whether that is based in evidence or not. I mean, there are a whole lot of crime statistics that have gone down, but it serves a particular agenda to stoke that fuel, and so, or to stoke that fire, and that the story he told does that. The second thing I want to say is, all of you have talked about the central agenda, the message. I believe that there is very little central agenda that is comprehensive, that is a vision for the province. And I'm saying this because we're on the eve of the legislature going back. And I'm not sure that this government could lay out what it is exactly they want to do, short of, we want to build this bridge, we want to open this hospital, whatever. But the vision for the province, our institutions, our education system, our social assistance program, what is the plan for reducing poverty? What is the plan for strengthening our society? And even what is our economic plan? If we go back to our original conversation about the auto sector, what is our plan for supporting people and making sure that communities are healthy through this transition? I don't think that plan is in place. And I think a lot of these things are distractions from that reality. And we'll see when they come back. But I don't think there's a whole lot of legislation pending in terms of creating that vision for the province.
Well, next time we meet, the legislature will have been seated. And Tim, I know you're disappointed we didn't talk about bike lanes today, but we might get to it next week.
I'll rage next week, and I'll somehow wrap Home Depot into my story.
There you go.
Well, hopefully that skills development fund at least plays a role in the legislature next week.
I expect it will.
We have to have something on this. I know we didn't get to it today, but I did want to throw it in there. This thing stinks to high heaven. It's the same language in the Greenbelt reports. And they appear to have learned nothing. And to Premier Wynne's point, I think that the goal of this government, their overarching achievement, is just hanging on to power.
All right. Well, we'll ring those bells next week.
He did a speech. I was there for the speech. Everybody talked about Home Depot. The speech laid out the economic plan. It laid out the plan on municipalities. It laid out investments in health energy.
And he walked all over it. He walked all over it. So
true.
Not what he cares about, Tim.
He laid out the plan.
He'd rather beat somebody up in a parking lot.
All right. Thanks to Kathleen Wynne, Keith Leslie, John Wright, Tim Hudak. We'll be back at it again next week. And again, yes, the legislature finally back in business after a rather lengthy time off. I'm Dave Trafford, and this is On the Ledge, your Ontario politics podcast.
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain.